Hello. We're now going to move on to creating a skeleton and binding it to the mesh. Now, in order to do this, you want to start by first changing your file menu to rigging so that it gives you the correct tools that you need, and also under your tool shelf going to the rigging shelf to be able to access those same tools. Now, the first one I'm going to show you is up here under skeleton, create joints. And if you'll notice, the symbol right next to it is the same one that's represented here for create joints. Once you've selected that tool, you can click in space to be able to create a skeleton. So if I hit enter, I have now created a skeleton. Now I want to talk very quickly about parent-child relationships because hierarchy is very important with rigs. Think about it in terms of your own body. If this represents something like your finger, it's at the end of the parent chain. If you move your finger, it does not necessarily mean that the rest of your arm will move, just that one piece. However, if you move your shoulder, even if you keep your finger absolutely still, it moves in relationship to that shoulder movement and the rest of the arm. So it doesn't necessarily need to be wiggling, but it's still moving because of the parent controlling the overall movement in space. So these parent-child relationships play a very important role in rigging because they control what parts affect or influence other parts. With that understanding, let's move on to actually rigging the cylinder. And I'm going to do it in two parts to be able to illustrate how you set up parent-child relationships. So, for example, if I grab this tool, I'm going to hit the spacebar key. And once again, I can grab it from a few different places. I can go to skeleton, create joints. Oops. I can grab it from here under the rigging shelf or as the last tool used. But if I look at this from the front, switch to wireframe, I'm going to start by designing part of this and then do the rest. So if I start at the bottom, I want to put a joint at each one of these edge loops coming up the mesh. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bottom. However, for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to put them all in at once. Instead, I'm going to only put in a few of them, but I also want to make sure that they all work. So I'm going to hold down the X key and I will drop the first joint at the origin. The second joint I'll drop there. Third joint there, fourth, and we'll just stop with there for now. Because of the parent-child relationship, one thing I can do if I want to put these in a position, if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, it needs to go there, I can just hold down the V key or snap to point and drag that up and into place, which gets it lined up exactly where I want. And because I'm doing it from the front view and looking at the grid, it's dropping it exactly in the center of that grid so that it's overall center of the object. And this works good. The problem is I try and move this next joint into place, it moves that one up. So in a parent-child relationship, you need to start with the top of the hierarchy. You need to start with the overall parent and then work your way down the chain. And in this case, I'm going up directionally, but it's down the chain to get everything positioned so that it's not influenced or moved around by the parent after the fact. And so in that way, using snap to point, I put each of these four where I want them in place. Coming back to this view. Now I realize that I want 3 other joints in this chain. So what I can do is I can come here, holding down the X key once again for snap to grid. I will go 1, 2, 3. And I will move these into space. This one looks like it's already there, but I will double check, make sure it lines up exactly where I need it. Move the next one into place. And the next one into place. Now, I want to be able to set up this parent-child relationship so that this continues down the chain. There are a few ways of doing this. The first is to come up here and go Edit Parent, but I can also use the hotkeys of P to parent or Shift P to unparent. So I'm going to grab one of these joints and then Shift select the other and hit P to parent. And it's that simple. You see, from the larger arrow going down, that shows the hierarchical relationship. The larger side is the parent, the child is the point. So there's these arrows going all the way down the chain. Now I'm going to Control Z to step back. If I had grabbed those in reverse order and then hit P, you'll notice that now this is the parent. This is the one that's controlling everything, and the hierarchy goes down the chain to this next child. Because a child cannot have two parents in this case, real life, yes, every child has two parents, but in the case of skeletons, you have a single parent chain. As soon as you attach a new parent to an object, it removes previous parents in the hierarchy. And so if you notice this happening as you're trying to attach things in, then it's probably because you have the parent-child relationship reversed or confused somehow. So in order to fix this, I'll grab this object and then the parent and hit P to change that. Grab that child, shift select the parent, and hit P to parent that. If I have an object that needs to be unparented, once again, shift P to unparent it, and then I can move it in space and then parent it again. I don't actually want it moved in space, so I will Control Z to undo that. But that is how you can parent and unparent. And once again, look at the hierarchy. If you select a parent, it will select everything within its hierarchy that will be influenced by using it. So if I select down here, it only selects the joints below it in the parent or the hierarchy. And same thing, if I select this origin joint, then that influences all the joints below it. Now I want to attach this to the mesh, because right now, yeah, I can move the skeleton around, but it doesn't really help me with doing anything with this the mesh. So what I will do is I will select the mesh and then shift select the joint chain. I can then come up to Skin, Bind Skin, and you see there's the bind skin there, but I want to change some settings first. So I selected this option box next to bind skin to bring this up. I'm going to keep most of this the same with one exception. So yeah, joint hierarchy, closest distant, classic linear. I want the weights normalized as interactive, weight distribution by distance. I just want one bind pose. I don't want multiples. I also want the max influences to be set to 3, because I really, for my purposes right now, I don't need more than 3 influences. If I add more than that, then it can become even more confusing, but I want to simplify for myself. And then I'll select bind skin. Now color is very important in Maya, as you found out by playing with the modeling tools, where green represents the object, and then there's the other colors for the component mode and things like that. Purple means that there is something else influencing it. And so when I select the mesh by itself, nothing happens. But if I select something that's influencing it, like this joint chain, the mesh turns purple to reflect that it will be influenced by this joint chain. Also, if you'll notice, the joint chain has changed color to show how things line up in the hierarchy from the parent down the child chain. And so if I add in more, then it would actually adjust the colors a little bit and the hues in between. But hopefully this gives you a good idea. Now that this is bound, selecting the wrong tool. Now that this is bound, you don't want to delete the history because it will unbind it. Once again, if you have problems with the mesh that need to be cleaned up after the fact, you can delete non-deformer history. That would be edit, delete by type, non-deformer history, but that won't necessarily always get it. That's another reason to make sure as often as possible that the mesh is as clean as it can be before you start this process. What I can do with this now is, because it's bound and it's got the influences set up, I can actually come in, start grabbing joints, and you see I can use these joints to animate this object. So I'm going to Control Z to step back. We'll end this video here for now. In the next video, we'll come back and start talking about painting weights.